so you wanted to talk during the pre-commission agenda? Okay, and I already asked Christy to bring Micron in, so. Yeah, but you can still ask for it.
Go for it, okay, good.
ACHD employee. Stacy, ACHD employee.
Just ACHD social.
Social.
Or we take Venmo too.
You don't know it? You don't know it? You don't do Venmo?
Joan does.
I've earned the right to do whatever I want to do.
That's true. I'm just a little
No.
like, yeah,
No.
you have earned the right to do that, but yeah. That's good.
It's like celery. I refuse to eat celery.
Okay.
1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, he's over at
What did you say?
food trade.
Okay.
Commissioner Goldthorpe decided to
He wasn't there.
You weren't waiting for me, were
I
you?
was.
Oh my goodness.
No. Tenured
Thank you.
wisdom. Commissioner. All right. The fountain of wisdom.
Stop where you're at.
All right, it's 5:31. I'm going to go ahead and kick off our pre-commission agenda. I do want to acknowledge that we did have another death on our roadway. A child was hit off of Gowan Road and passed away. So don't have a lot of details at this time, but we'll continue to monitor the situation. And as the ACE is the commissioner that sits on the Boise Fatal Traffic Review Task Force with Ryan, we'll be reviewing those technical details as well. So super horrific thing to read about while we were away this weekend. So that's all I have, but I believe Commissioner Hansen would like to say a few words about our conference that a few of us attended over the weekend.
Yes. Well, I also, because I represent the area where the little boy is from, the Columbia Village area, and I've received messages, and there was tell us and so forth. The more we can understand what happened, the better, so that we can constantly be on top of these. Just because you happen to live near a state highway and you want to go to the grocery store or the nearby right there, shouldn't be a life-threatening experience. Yes, we went to a great conference. I heard a lot from one of the things I'm particularly interested in is I couldn't believe how far along the Micron expansion is. And there is a huge impact to our network at that end of the city, and there's a lot of interest in, obviously, the people who live there now on where that is. So to the extent we can have an update on that and continue to see how that's going to impact our system, the anticipated increase of 15,000 new employees at that site. So I just wanted to sort of raise that issue. There's also some discussions about the expansion of the facilities south of the airport, and I know that the Master Street Map calls for the arterial network down there, arterial and collector network, industrial area, but it's not funded. So I just sort of, there's sort of this mixed expectations, I think, of when things are going to happen and how they lay out. So an update on that would be tremendously valuable. Just looking at the agenda today, I'm looking at our council. Obviously the Munger Bridge is critical. We have to do that. But I look at the the developments, new developments in that area, lots of new developments in that area. And if there's any way in which we could tweak our impact fee statute so that the new developments help to pay for new bridges that are necessitated by those new developments. The road's not going to be widened, but the bridge has to be replaced. The bridges have to be replaced. And it just seems to me that the full cost of something like that can't be paid for by impact fees. Because it wouldn't be necessary if it weren't for the fact that it's now being used and needs to be used and used extensively by residences out there. So just want to raise that up. I have no problem approving that, leaving it on the consent agenda. But something like that should be paid for by impact fees. It just doesn't make sense that later we have, property taxes have to pay for that kind of safety improvement that's critical. We can't not fix those bridges that don't meet safety standards. So I want to raise that.
Thanks,
Thank
Commissioner
you.
Hanson. Okay, do we have any housekeeping items? Questions about the agenda? Okay, Director Wong.
Madam President, Commissioners, good afternoon. Great to have you here. Several topics this afternoon. First off, we have some very special celebrations today. The first is, of course, Administrative Professional Appreciation Day, and I would like to again publicly thank Stacy Spencer for the tremendous job she does, not only supporting the entire organization, but of course being the world's greatest commission support member that we have as clerk of the court. But it is a very, very important day, and we are celebrating that. Also today, as you know, is Sexual Assault Awareness Day, and so we are wearing denim across the board in support, and of course we are contributing to several very important funds with the profits that we make off of that very special event. And then on Sunday, Commissioners, while we were traveling to Sun Valley, there was an important event that occurred here today, or on that Sunday. And that Sunday was the celebration of a 21st anniversary of a birthday for Sherry Knaus. I think she's right back there, probably staring at me nastily right now. And such. So at the break, we do have a cheesecake that we would like to help you, or have you asked to help celebrate this very, very important date and such. Commissioners, meeting updates. So that you know, Thursday, tomorrow, we have our Bring Your Child to Work Day. We have over 175 plus children, kiddos, that we're going to be corralling and entertaining and such. I put this on your desk and such just to show you the intense background planning that has gone into this. This is one of our favorite events here at the district, and as I think I've shared with you before, we actually have prior children that came to the Bring Your Child Work Day that are now full-time employees here at the district. So it is truly a successful event, and I already know the 4 phone calls I will receive by about 7:15, 7:30 tomorrow from the residents right over here who don't like all the horns that all the kids are going to be executing in all the big trucks that they're going into. So it's going to be a lot of fun. If you can stop by, please do. Friday, as you all know, we are touring the ACHD TMC construction site. It's 10 o'clock. If you are going to go, please let Stacy know so we can notice this and such. We're going to meet out there. And I talked to our builder at the conference. He's very excited about this. And so they have a lot to share. Tuesday, next week, is the all staff at Adams beginning at 8 o'clock. And such, and it's going to be a lot of fun. And then Tuesday, that evening, we have the North End Neighborhood Chip Seal presentation by our team to the North End Neighborhood Association. That's at 7 o'clock. Thursday, May 2nd, we're hosting the ACHD Commercial Developers Advisory Committee at Orchard at 10 o'clock. And then on 9 May, I'm taking Leadership ACHD to Mountain Home Air Force Base for a tour hosted by our support squadron and the wing leadership out at Mountain Home. A couple things to share with you regarding operations. As you know, this is generally metrics week when it comes down to reviewing everything we do. So just some interesting tidbits for you all. First off, year to date, Commuter Ride has displaced 1,688,059 vehicle miles traveled, while removing 1,309 tons of CO2. A very successful program that benefits so many different avenues. Year to date, Jennifer's Warriors have filled, HR's Warriors have filled 94 positions, both internal and external, with new candidates at about a 50-50 mix, which is important that we have new people from the outside coming in, but again, providing the tremendous opportunities for advancement and promotion here within the district. Our retention rate remains at a high 95+% here at the district. For legal, and I generally don't talk about legal and such, but we have received 36 public records requests in the month of March with an amazing 4.03 business day turnaround. That's incredible. We've also received 32 legal requests with a 3.6 business day turnaround. They're doing a tremendous job. Again, quite unheard of. Currently, we are responsible for 5,384 lane miles at a current average cost of $9,801 per lane mile. That's in March. Jennifer's team in March filled 1,053 potholes in January, 829 in February, 643 in March, and we're still working through April. So it has been a very intense, aggressive couple months for her team. For the 440 vehicles that we're responsible for, our fleet team is maintaining them at a 98.3% in-service rate. As I've said to you many times, that's amazing to be able to do that. For Ryan's team, for March, we completed an additional 17 rapid deployment projects, and year to date, we've completed 76 rapid projects with another 96 in development or construction. Commissioners, thank you for letting us do that. It is working, and it's working very, very well. Of great importance, we are, and of course, one of one is too many. One of one is too many. But so far, we've seen a 92% decrease in fatalities over 2023 so far. That's important. We have a ways to go. For us as a team, Ryan's team continues to post a 9-day turnaround for development applications. That's incredible. And a 36-day review time for construction plan submittals. Again, that is really breaking the envelope across the board. Additionally, the team has issued 243 permits in March and 277 traffic control plan reviews also in March. One of the things I keep sharing with you on this monthly basis is street signs, an indicator of growth. So we have installed 620 one signs in March alone, which is 100 signs below everything we did last year. So just an indicator for you as to what is going on in the county. Plans and projects, great teams are on target regarding the FY22 for projected budgets. I think there's less than a 2% variance of planned and actual right now, which means pencils are being very sharpened, and the team is paying very close attention. As important, we have funded $1,587,904.23 supporting ADA compliance actions year to date. Again, incredibly important and a great milestone. 466.67 bike facility miles, and as important, ACHD's overall PCI average for the 5,384 mile lanes is 78, which is right up there at the very top of the scale. As you know, we have the greatest communications team on the planet, and so for Facebook, we have 9,709 followers and recorded 10,378 engagements and 149,978 impressions in March alone, with the top post being the Amity Road 5 Mile to Maple Grove project. ACHD Communications also chaired two major campaigns in March, Meet Your Commissioner, and the Women's History Month highlighting Aloha Wanderwell, the first women to drive around the globe. And so it's something you probably wouldn't expect from a highway district, sharing that with all of our followers. For next door, we recorded 389,323 impressions with 511 thank yous. For TELUS, we achieved a 96% one-week response time, again, which is absolutely tremendous. In March, we also posted 3 public involvement meetings, 4 community meetings, and 19 business meetings, all very profitable when it came down to transparency and community engagement. And finally, we do continue to see fluctuations for food, beverage, transportation, and housing across the nation and in Idaho, all increasing in price, none of them going down. We have also seen an 18.8% increase in unleaded gas over last month alone, and but what's interesting, a 5.5% decrease in diesel from last month alone. The Mountain CPI remains at 2.5%, and the Mountain West region, in the Mountain West region, while the average price rose to 3.5% across the country. So, Commissioners, that's just a little tidbit of what we look at when it comes down to not only metrics within Ada County, in the district, and nationally, but just a little insight as to how we're doing. So with that, that's my director's report. I would ask that you join Sherry and Stacy and the rest of the group in celebrating the great event for today, and I hope to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Director. Any questions? All right. Thanks all. We'll be at ease until 6. Thank you.
Sherry, you get to come up here and cut all the cake.
All right, it's now 6 o'clock. I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. Welcome everyone that joins us in person and online. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Commissioners, is there a motion to adopt the agenda?
Yes, so moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. The next item is the consent agenda. Items on the consent agenda are considered to be routine and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion on these items unless a commissioner or citizen so requests, in which case the item will be removed from the consent agenda and placed on the regular agenda. All consent agenda items are commission action items unless otherwise noted. Don't believe we have any of those requests. So commissioners, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Madam President, I would move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. All right, so moving on to the regular agenda, we do not have any regular agenda items. So I'll move over to public communications. Is there anyone that would like to address the commission at this time? All right, well, with that, the meeting is adjourned. We're going to switch over into the post-commission agenda. We've got several work sessions. The first being the Linder Street Pine Ustick Concept Study. This is an information briefing and presentation by staff. Welcome, Ms. Brooke Green.
Thank you, commissioners. I'd like just to take a moment really quick and get my PowerPoint put together. So let's get this. Let's see. Okay, are you able to see the screen itself?
Brooke, we can see your notes too, so maybe do a different display setting.
Yes, let's move this over. Duplicate. All right, is that better?
There you go. Thank you.
All right, fabulous. Okay, well, I'll go ahead and start the presentation itself. Again, it's a privilege to be before you. Do want to highlight that I unfortunately not able to be in person. I do want to highlight I have some assistants there in the audience. Pearson with HDR Engineering is there to provide any support and is certainly happy to come to the podium, answer any questions in which you guys may have. Move this around so I'm looking. For the record, I'm the Senior Transportation Planner within Plans and Projects before you this evening to provide you a briefing on the Linder Road Pine to Ustick concept. The objective of tonight's presentation will be to review the three alternatives that were taken to the public this past December. I'll be reviewing the findings from the public engagement, introduce the estimated costs, and discuss the next steps. The team objective, just to quickly recap, with the implementation of the Linder Road concept, was to achieve improved corridor as a residential arterial user for all users. This includes creating an enhancement and an environment for both bikes and pedestrians, achieving a level of traffic stress 1 or 2, while also recognizing the unique existing land uses along the corridor. Since the last time I presented to you, we have conducted an online PIM in December, presented to the Meridian Transportation Committee, Meridian City Council, and conducted a second series of owner meetings in the evening times when they were available. The study area is no further north than Ustick and no further south than West Pine Avenue. Local attractors along the corridor include Tolley Park on the east side, Barbara Morgan Elementary School on the west side, Meridian High School at the corner of Pine Avenue and Linder Road. So our path to adoption, I just want to highlight where we've been and where we're going. December of 2022 was the first of a series of public outreach. We conducted an online survey. January through May, we conducted some data collection and modeling. June through September of 2023 is when we did several alternative developments. It was at that point shortly thereafter in October where we did our first commission check-in. October through December, some changes to our alternatives that we took to the public. We also conducted our second series of property owner interviews. It was also during this time that we went out with the PAG and actually walked to Linder to get kind of an on the ground view of the constraints in the environment and what it looks like for both the pedestrians as well as vehicles who are traversing through the area. November 2023, I checked back in with you prior to going to the public in December. As I highlighted at the introduction, December 4th is when we met with the Meridian Transportation Committee, shortly thereafter the Meridian City Council, and December 5th is when we conducted our virtual open house. We're here April 2024 for our next commission check-in. However, following our check-in this evening, we're going to go back to the Meridian Transportation Committee, back before the Meridian City Council. We started property owner engagement meetings last night and will continue that for the duration of May with anticipated adoption summer of 2024. I'm going to introduce 3 concepts this evening, and there's a lot of slides associated with each concept. Thus, after I'm done with each concept, I'll pause, open it up for any questions or comments. This will allow us to kind of go back before those the previous slides, because there's a lot to unpack in the next coming slides that will be before you. The slide that you have before you, this is a typical section reflected. It's concept 1. It's our 3 lanes with a shared use roadway. The typical view in which you're looking at only applies between West Sandalwood Drive and West Chateau Drive, and that is because it's the pinch point through the corridor. We're also constrained with the pedestrian facilities at this location because of the number of homes that front Linder. The visual before you reflects landscaped buffers, landscaped medians, and 2 travel lanes. This footprint is approximately 75 feet at this location. However, through the rest of the corridor from Pine until Ustick, rather than shared use roadways, we're making the recommendation for pedestrian facilities as multi-use pathways, with the exception of 1 location, and I'll highlight that in the coming slides. Moving along, I do want to just highlight how we're going to work our way through this corridor. It's about 1.5 miles. I'm going to start here at West Pine Avenue. I'm going to highlight some local attractors along the corridor and work our way north. I will start with the top aerial visual, and then I will move to the bottom. So I want to start here where we're looking at the corner of West Pine Avenue in Linder. You've got the main attractor here, which is the Meridian High School. I also want to draw your attention to the existing pavement footprint between West Pine Avenue and Washington. This is as it's reflected today. I'm going to walk through the corridor and highlight some pedestrian enhancements as well as some concerns pertaining to parcel impacts. In addition to that, highlight some of our other recommendations for the footprint itself. So our first enhancement for pedestrians is this pedestrian hybrid beacon located here at West State Street. This is to help facilitate children who are accessing Meridian High School there on the southwest corner. Continuing along the corridor, you're going to see the first recommendation of landscaped median. And then we're going to get down here to Washington Street where it pinches down from its existing conditions. Something to note, you're going to see the reflection of a multi-use pathway through this whole corridor. That's the difference in this existing condition. The pedestrian facilities, as it is today, is attached sidewalks. We're recommending multi-use pathways moving forward. Continuing on to the aerial visual that is reflected on the bottom of the screen, you're going to see the continuation of the landscape median. I want to draw your attention to the landscape medians. These are recommendations throughout the corridor, and it really is to control access from adjacent streets. So you're going to see West Avenue. This is going to end up being a right in, right out, rather than trying to cross and get into the southbound traffic. They're only going to be able to go right. Again, you're going to see an additional recommendations for a rapid flashing beacon at this location. And this is to help facilitate cyclists who are using the existing low stress bikeway continue along the corridor. As I highlighted earlier, there is 1 location along the corridor where we are making a recommendation where the multi-use pathway is only on the west side. And it's a result of these 5 parcels located at this corner of Northgate Avenue. To be able to preserve these 5 homes, we are making a recommendation for a detached sidewalk. Anything more than that, and we will start to see property impacts with these 5 homes. Continuing along the corridor itself, we're going to go past West Cherry Lane, and we're going to start to come to our pinch point that I highlighted in previous presentations. This pinch point will start here at West Sandalwood Drive. It's the first of 2 roundabout recommendations. We are making this roundabout being a 1 travel lane roundabout. As we continue through the roundabout itself, as you're going to start to see the recommendations for those shared use roadways, and that's to be able to accommodate homes who are adjacent right to Linder, who are front Linder, to be able to get better access. We're going to continue to make the recommendations for the landscape median through this whole corridor, and then you'll come out of this pinch point with another roundabout and continue along the corridor past Holy Park. I do want to highlight both of these shared use roadways, as we highlighted in previous commission presentations, are one way. The texture of the shared use road are different than the pavement that you will see on Linder Road, and that's to really enhance and make it visual for drivers who are traversing through this area, that is not a road in which they should be accessing, rather it's only a driveway access for the number of homes that are front Linder. So thus, if you live here on the west side and you reside in one of these homes, if you needed to get access and you were going north down Linder, you would go around the roundabout, make that turn, and then access the shared use road and continue onto your home. I did provide an additional slide to give you an idea of what that pinch point does look like. As I mentioned, this pinch point is bookended by two suggested one-lane roundabouts. And again, just to recap what that typical section will look like, as I introduced earlier in the slide presentation, this is, again, the shared use roadways on both sides. We are constrained on pedestrian facilities, as I mentioned, because of the homes. Continuing along the corridor, I want to just go back up here to the top aerial. And this is going to see another recommendation for pedestrian facilities. This is an enhanced hybrid beacon. And this is to help facilitate pedestrians and cyclists who are needing to get over here to the Linder Meridian pathway. And lastly, I do want to highlight the 5 Mile Creek treatment options. You're going to see several different treatment options as we move through the concepts. In design, should the team have one preference over another, or would they like to test out an option? They're certainly welcome to examine, based off of the feedback we receive from the Meridian Irrigation District and the City of Meridian, what option would be appropriate at this location. So this is one of several options for the multi-use pathway. This option has you crossing 5 Mile Creek. It puts the multi-use pathway adjacent to the homes. It's behind the creek, and then connects back up here as it gets closer to Ustick. Continuing along the corridor itself is the existing conditions as we see it today at Ustick and Linder. However, the pedestrian facilities, rather than being attached sidewalks, we're making the recommendations for a multi-use pathway. I'll go ahead and pause at this moment. Are there any questions pertaining to concept 1 before I move on to concept 2 or 3?
Yeah, Brooke, we've got several folks that have questions, so bear with us. So Commissioner Goldthorpe?
I'm understanding everything so far except for the discussion about the pinch point. Are those two shared lanes, one on either side, going to be identified as not letting the traffic welcome on there? I can just see with a pedestrian or a bicyclist on they're on a 12-foot lane with a vehicle and that close to the homes, that folks that like to invent cut-through traffic might consider that as open season for trying to get ahead of other traffic. And how are we going to prevent that?
Madam President, Commissioner Goldthorpe, that's a very good question, and one we have thought about. Certainly in the design phase, we're going to look at treatment options that would provide and enhance it for traffic calming. Really what we want to ensure is this is just an access point for residents who reside adjacent to it. We don't want to create an opportunity for them to have a cut through or for vehicles to quickly try to go through that location. And so we are going to take those into considerations and make appropriate treatment options.
Have you considered what the speed limit would be on those outside lanes?
The outside lanes are just driveway access. Certainly we would, we actually probably want to mark them as a speed limit, because really what it is a driveway access to the residents themselves.
Okay.
We certainly can look to speed limits, but if we add the appropriate treatment options for traffic calming, we can ensure that they will go slow through this location. I also want to highlight that the pavement, that will be different. So it won't be the same pavement that you will see there on Linder Road. We can look to other options for pavement conditions as though you're driving onto a driveway itself. And so there are many options that we can look at to ensure that the treatment is appropriate and that it is slow for vehicles and pedestrians to share that same space.
Thank you.
Commissioner McKinney?
Thank you. Yes, Brooke, just a quick question. At the south end of the project for this concept 1, what is the rationale there's already a 5-lane section, an existing 5-lane section from Pine to Washington. Why is this concept proposing to rebuild that?
Madam President, Commissioner McKinney, is this the location you're talking about, West Pine Avenue and Washington Street?
No, the Linder Road from Pine to Washington, that stretch there, right by the high school. It's already an existing 5-lane section, and I think it was built less than 20 years ago. Why would we rebuild that section? Sounds like, it strikes me as a waste of $1 million.
Madam President and Commissioner McKinney, we were actually making the recommendations to keep the existing pavement width. The recommendations at this location is the enhancements for the multi-use pathway and the installation of a landscape median and the installation of pedestrian hybrid beacon. So we're not looking to change anything as it pertains to the pavement as it is today. It's just an enhancement for the pedestrians.
So keeping the pavement and the curb gutter, but changing the sidewalks is what you're saying.
Madam President and Commissioner McKinney, that is the intent. We certainly recognize that this was recently redone in 2021 with the intersection enhancements there at Pine Avenue. And so the recommendations are just to enhance it for pedestrian facilities and of course, start that introduction of the landscape center median through the corridor.
Okay, thank you.
Brooke, just clarifying after Commissioner McKinney's question. So is that section just the section that you have on the screen, or is that the entire length of the project?
Madam President, the section that was improved in 2021 is, let me see if I can get my cursor here, starts at West Pine Avenue with the intersection itself and continues on to Washington Street. Everything after that pinches down in this concept and continues the 3-lane concept through the rest of the corridor.
So just to say it a different way though, so from, and it's really hard to read, from here, is that Plum? So from Plum to, oh, Pine, sorry, excuse me, Pine to Washington, that is existing, and that was redone in 2021, but the rest of the corridor was not redone in 2021. Is that correct?
Madam President, yes.
Okay. Brooke, I do have a question about the last slide with the detached pathway that goes over the canal. Do you mind scrolling over to that slide, please? So could you, it's hard to understand the scale with this, just being such a small picture. Could you explain your guys' thought process around placing that pathway there versus having it closer to the roadway? What challenges did you have to navigate that made this recommendation?
Madam President, Commission, so the recommendation here is because 5 Mile Creek, and if you've been along the corridor, it is really steep. Matter of fact, as you get actually to this location, and if you can see my cursor, Linder Meridian pathway, there's actually some bollards that are in place now to keep pedestrians from traversing this location because of the steepness into 5 Mile Creek. Placing the multi-use pathway behind, there's actually a lot of space available to be able to adequately give some distance between the multi-use pathway and the steepness of the 5 Mile Creek. So that is the recommendation here. We have available space. It's a safer alternative. If we wanted to put the multi-use pathway adjacent to the roadway with this 3-lane concept, we would look to having to tile 5 Mile Creek. This allows us to keep it daylighted. This allows the discussion to continue with Meridian Irrigation District as well as the City of Meridian with their preferences. But this keeps it daylighted. Any other alternatives, if we were to encroach on that space closer to the roadway, we would have to look to tile it.
Thanks, Brooke. And what's the length of this from connecting to the roadway on each side?
Madam President, I don't have that length available. Certainly a follow-up question that I can get back to you after this presentation.
And I'm just, the reason for my question is I'm just trying to see, that's quite I can't tell like how big of a distance that is, right, for a bicyclist to go out of their way versus potentially stay on the roadway. And so I'm just trying to understand like the length of it and the pros and cons. Is it a few hundred yards? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it's certainly not, we're not asking them to go half a mile from the distance. It's certainly just a couple hundred feet at that,
Okay.
to get access to the rest of the multi-use pathway.
Thanks, Brooke. And then my last question is, I really appreciate you having the landscape medians in here. Is that a very like hypothetical conversation, or are we seeing some indication that that's actually likely to happen if this concept or future concepts that include landscape medians, that would come to fruition?
Madam President, Commission, we have been in discussions throughout this whole process with the City of Meridian about the landscape medians. Certainly they are in support of it and would like to see it throughout the corridor. Provides not only that, but it also greens up the space. In addition to that, it also provides access management.
Right. I just hope, yeah, if there's conversations that we need to have about urging support for the landscape medians, it's such because we've had that conversation at our last joint meeting with Meridian and a few other folks. So if we need to, be part of that conversation, I just want you to know, like, I'm happy to have that.
Thank you, Madam President, Commission. I do want to highlight that the City of Meridian was in the process of creating some standards pertaining to landscape amenities along these corridors. And so this is reflective of that effort that took place this past fall. So we've been in discussion, they're certainly in support, and hopefully they'll continue that support as this moves forward towards adoption.
And then my last question, Brooke, this intersection of, Linder and Ustick, we're not replacing, or would this design and would it replace any of the lighting, the mast arms? Would we be putting in new ones, or would we be reusing the ones that are currently in there?
Madam President, Commission, is the existing conditions as it is today that we intend to keep in place. Those were some enhancements that took place just several years ago. Certainly we want to ensure that we keep them as they are existing today.
That's great. Okay. I don't see any other questions, so carry on. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So that wraps up concept 1. We have 2 more concepts to go through. So as we move along the corridor, and this is concept 2. This is our standard 5-lane that we took out to the public. I do want to highlight this footprint is approximately 89 feet. I also want to highlight the typical section in which you're looking at applies for all of Linder Road, Pine to Ustick. In this typical section, you're going to see the recommendations for a multi-use pathway there on both sides, landscape buffers, landscape medians, and then the 4 travel lanes. As highlighted earlier, we're going to start with two aerials on each screen. Bring some attention to here at the southwest corner, West Pine Avenue. Just to orient ourselves one more time, this is the Meridian High School. As highlighted before, this is the existing condition as it is today, Pine to Washington. Something you're going to note, the existing condition from Pine to Washington is the recommendation we're going to take all the way through the corridor. Again, some enhancements for pedestrians who are navigating through the space. The first is the pedestrian hybrid beacon, the continuation of the suggested landscape medians. Continuing on to the second aerial that you see below, you're going to see the recommendation of a multi-use pathway continues through Cherry Lane. You recall, previous concept is we were making a recommendation for a detached sidewalk, and that was to preserve these homes located here. I do want to draw your attention as we make our way through the corridor with this concept. All of the yellow boxes recommended parcels that we're going to have to purchase if this is the concept that moves forward. Before I leave this slide, however, I do just want to come back over here to the pedestrian recommendation. This is our recommendation for pedestrian hybrid beacon. Again, that's to help facilitate those who are traversing on the existing low-stress bikeway. Continue through the corridor itself, we're going to get to where we mentioned the pinch point. This is Sandalwood Drive, and this is Chateau Drive. Rather than the recommendations for a roundabout, we're certainly making just the recommendations for standard intersections. However, at West Chateau Drive, we are making a recommendation for signalized intersection. The continuation of landscape medians through this corridor, and then we're going to want to draw your attention to all of the hatchings. The yellow boxes recommend parcels that we're going to have to purchase should this option be moved forward. This is what that looks like in itself. West Sandalwood Drive over here to the south. You have got Chateau Drive over here to the north, and the number of parcels that are adjacent to the roadway that will have to be purchased. I do want to take a moment and pause and just highlight some of the engagement that we've had with many of these property owners throughout this process. When Linder Road started, we made our first engagement with the property owners. We conducted a series of evening virtual meetings where we met with each property owner, discussed the concept itself, discussed the process. Once we had alternatives, we went back to those property owners. We sat down with them, went through the alternatives before they went out to the public. And then following that, we started last night a number of meetings again. We really wanted to get an understanding of what these impacts potentially could look like, because the reality is this is someone's home and we wanted to have those discussions. The conversations we're having now is whether or not they have a preference of which option they'd like to see move forward. And I hope when we come to our adoption this summer, I'll be able to report my findings of all those property meetings. Continuing along, I just want to quickly recap what that standard 5-lane cross-section looks like. Again, it's a footprint of approximately 89 feet. This continues through the whole corridor. Continuing closer to when we get to Tully Park, I want to highlight what this looks like. You're going to see, just to orient ourselves, because it looks a little bit different. This is Tully Park here, where you can see my cursor. You're going to see the suggestion of a pedestrian hybrid beacon. This is the multi-use pathway recommendation adjacent to Linder Road. Because of the footprint of the roadway is what it is, we are making the recommendation that we're going to have to cover 5 Mile Creek because we need that extra space. Thus, the recommendation is the multi-use pathway would be right there adjacent to the roadway itself. This discussion about 5 Mile Creek, as I've highlighted before, will take place in concert with the City of Meridian, the Meridian Irrigation District, and a decision will be made through our design process. And lastly, to orient ourselves, we're back here at the bottom aerial visual. This is at Ustick and Linder, existing conditions with the recommendations for multi-use pathways. I'd like to go ahead and pause at this moment, open it up for any questions as it pertains to concept 2, the standard 5 lanes.
I don't see any questions, Brooke.
Okay, we'll move on to concept 3. Concept 3 is 5 lanes with a shared use road. The typical section before you shows an approximate footprint of 96 feet. In this typical section, you're going to see the recommendations for the shared use roads, multi-use pathway. However, I do want to highlight, when we went out to the public, we did not show a shared use road and a sidewalk adjacent to that. One of the changes we made as a recommendation from our previous engagement in December was the actual installation of a sidewalk next to that shared use road to delineate the space for pedestrians as well as cyclists and those who are trying to access their homes. Something to note, you're only going to see this recommendation of a shared use road on the west side, because to attain this footprint, we have to purchase the homes on the east side. And thus on the east side, we're making a recommendation for a multi-use pathway. Again, I do want to reiterate, this shared use road is only between West Sandalwood Drive and West Chateau. Again, it's that pinch point. You see the 5 travel lanes with the landscape median there in the middle and the buffer landscape separating the multi-use pathway and the shared use road and the sidewalk space. Continuing along the corridor, just to orient ourselves, here's Meridian High School. West Pine Avenue is where we're going to start. The existing footprint as it pertains to the pavement will continue through the whole corridor. Do want to highlight, we have the recommendations for the hybrid beacon, continued recommendations for the landscape centered medians. Continue along, I do just want to draw our attention back to the boxes. Again, those are parcels that will have to be purchased should this option be moved forward. We get closer to the pinch point, and this is the big difference from the concept that we just went through on concept 2. The pinch point at this location, we're making the recommendation for a 2-lane roundabout. That first one will be there at Sandalwood. The second one will be there at Chateau. We do have significant property impacts with this recommendation. You're going to see, most notably, they're going to be around the roundabout itself and all there on the west side. Tully Park is here down in the corner to help you orient where we're at. To quickly just recap what that looks like for parcel purchases, all the yellow boxes recognize that those are parcels we're going to have to purchase should this be the option that moves forward. To give you an idea of what that looks like, just between that pinch point, you have got Sandalwood over here and West Chateau Drive. For us to make this enhancements for the multi-use pathway connection, what we originally thought we were going to be able to do to preserve these homes here on this corner. However, since our December meeting, doing some additional renderings and some modeling, it became apparent the homes at this location would have a difficult time getting access through the shared use road while still trying to accommodate the roundabout. So thus we actually had to increase our parcel purchases by additional 4 homes, should this be the option that moves forward. The shared use roadway option does preserve several homes that are located on the west side. And just to recap, I have met with almost every single property owner along this segment, and they all certainly have differing opinions of what preference that they would like, whether to stay or to move. And we're certainly working through that again, starting last night. Again, this is what that typical section looks like. 5 lanes for the shared use road, footprint of approximately 96 feet. This is our largest footprint, and primarily it's because of that shared use road. Continuing along the corridor, this is where you're going to see, again, a different type of recommendations for the multi-use pathway. Because we have available space between Linder Road and the adjacent homes, this recommendation puts the multi-use pathway back further from Linder Road and along closer to these homes, and then it connects again to, as it gets closer to Ustick. Hybrid beacon is there to help facilitate pedestrians traversing through this location, and of course the continuation of the landscape medians. Again, we conclude here at Ustick, pardon me, where we see our existing conditions as it is today, however, with the exceptions and the recommendations of a multi-use pathway. I'll go ahead and pause at concept 3, open it up should there be any questions.
Commissioner McKinney?
Thank you. Yes, Brooke, quick question, a couple of questions. So let's go back to the right-of-way question in that pinch point area that you were talking about. You said there were 4 more properties, but what's the net number of properties between options concept 2 and 3? It looks like concept 3 still requires fewer properties to acquire than concept 2, is that correct?
Madam President, Commissioner McKinney, yes, just to recap, concept 2, which is the largest footprint through the whole corridor, is approximately 34 parcels. Concept 3, we anticipate approximately 26 parcels.
Okay, and then could we also include roundabouts in the concept 2 situation? That is to say, concept 3 has the shared use driveway, or whatever we're calling it, the shared use road adjacent, but it's also a 5-lane section. Would it be possible to modify concept 2 and also include the roundabouts? What are the pros and cons of that? Have we considered that?
Certainly, Madam President, Commissioner McKinney, that is a good question. Yes, so if you were to want to accommodate the 2-lane roundabouts in the previous concept, we would actually see some additional parcel impacts, primarily in just to kind of, and actually, I think it's best if we actually go back so I can show you what those additional impacts would be. So if we were to make a recommendation, and this is concept 2, if we were to make a recommendation of the installation of a 2-lane roundabout, both here at Chateau as well as here at Sandalwood, we will see the additional purchase of these adjacent properties around the roundabout. And if you can see my cursor, that would be all the corner properties. So we could potentially see, and I'm just an estimate,
6 more properties to do
approximately
around
6 more properties.
Okay.
Certainly, yes, sir.
All right. Let me see. And so then, I imagine you're getting to this, but based on your discussions with property owners, and also with the people at City Meridian, what is their preliminary input regarding their preferences?
Madam President and Commissioner McKinney, so we are just now starting to ask the point blank question, would you like to move or stay? I will tell you, reflecting on the screen that's before you, and just let me highlight those parcels. All the parcels here on the west side, on the east side, the bottom of the screen, many of these property owners, and I can't give you a percentage quite yet, have indicated that their preference is to move. The property owners here on the west side, I will tell you, we met with this property owner last night. She did indicate that she's comfortable with having to move. And so I will say, as we move forward in the next month, with that question being asked to each property owner, I will be able to come back to you in the summer and confidently tell you with a percentage of who would like to move and who would like to stay. Right now, it's a little premature because we haven't asked that question point blank. In addition to Meridian Transportation Committee and the City of Meridian, we're going to have that conversation when I meet with them here in May.
Okay, then just, sorry, one follow-on question as well. Do we have kind of
Certainly.
some preliminary estimates of our design, right-of-way, and construction costs for the different concepts?
Madam President, Commissioner McKinney, I'm going to go through that here in a moment with our next subsequent slides.
Okay, great, sorry.
Before you do that, Commissioner Goldthorpe.
Yes, I am going to be waiting with bated breath to see how the Transportation Commission and the City Council, what their take is on this. I just know that with the bridge going over the interstate and what we already know is going to be the longest north-south corridor in the entire county once that bridge is completed, we really have to hopefully make some very accurate guesses as to what's going to happen with the traffic north of Pine. That's all.
Commissioner Hanson.
Yeah, thanks. And Brooke, I am wondering if I'm very interested to hear how the City of Meridian not only thinks about the design of this, but thinks about what its role would be related to the land use in that area. There are areas around the county in the area I'm familiar with where remnant parcels just are just left as remnant. Yet last Thursday, Boise City broke ground on a linear park. They took a piece of land that had just been looked at as useless and actually envisioned a linear park. So in the conversations with the City of Meridian, I'm not sure there's anything ACHD can do with all the remnants after if either 2 or 3 are moved forward as the concepts. There's a lot of property that is left over. What's the conversation should be now with the City of Meridian as to what they think should be that land use along those remnant parcels. And so I hope that in seeking Meridian's input, the City Council has already presented to us at our joint meeting that their preference is for all of the arterials throughout Meridian to be 5 lanes. So my assumption is that's the direction they're going. I'm just wondering how, if we can do it rather than in the forefront, and Meridian starts planning on the use of that, rather than later on when and those poor neighbors are sitting there next to empty space that used to have houses on them, and it just sits there and collects weeds. So I hope those conversations happen in this next phase with earnest.
Thank you, Madam President. And certainly I will convey your wishes to our Meridian staff who's participating on this process.
That's a really good point, Commissioner Hanson. Any other questions on concept 3? Okay, keep going, Brooke. Thank you.
Fabulous. Well, let me get back to the slides. So I do want to highlight, we did go back in December. We introduced all 3 of the concepts of which I presented to you this evening to the public. We had more than 500 people respond, 2.8 thousand project page visits. We asked 2 questions. The first of which, of the 3, which each 3 as their individual concepts, what did you love or like? You're going to see there concept 1, 3-lane design with shared use road, 26.1% either loved or liked it. Concept 2, this is the 5-lane standard, 60.5% loved it or liked it. Concept 3, 5-lane design with shared use road, 40% loved or liked it. To follow up with the question that is likely to come next is, of those, how many either resided next to or adjacent to Linder? We were able to discern approximately 50 people who participated in this process indicated that they live adjacent or on Linder. However, we are conducting all of those property owner meetings here in the next month, and so I'll have an answer to you which option that they would prefer to move forward. The second question in which we asked is, overall, which concept do you prefer? With 20% coming in is concept 1, that's the 3 lanes with a shared use road. Concept 2, 45.6%, this is the standard 5 lanes. Concept 3, this is the shared use road, is 28.3%. So thus, it's confident to say a significant number of respondents would prefer some 5-lane alternative to move forward.
Brooke, before you move on, can you go back one slide? I've got a question for you. Could you explain some of the specific feedback on concept 3? You know, if you look at the dislike and strongly dislike it, it's a lot more than concept 2. Was it mostly about that shared roadway or some other piece or component of that concept?
Madam President, Commissioner, we didn't go to that level of the detail. It is a significant difference between concept 2 and concept 3, the shared use road. I would anticipate, and this is just very generalization, that it is a shared use road to whether they liked it or didn't like. Because essentially it's somewhat the same concept through the corridor, except in that pinch point. Everything else stays the same.
And I'm also asking because I'm wondering like what their issue is with it, right? Is it because they think it's going to be confusing? They think it's a waste of space? So I think as you go back out, I think those nuances will be really helpful for us at the commission to understand.
Madam President, Commission, I can tell you when we have the conversations with the Meridian City Council, the Meridian Transportation Committee, as well as the property owners, specifically the concern was trying to wrap their head around pedestrians using a space that is for those accessing their homes, that shared use road concept. Hence why we made the recommendation for the 5-foot sidewalk in the next rendering. It was some feedback we received. We heard loud and clear that they'd like to see some delineation. Thus, that's the recommendation we have reflected here. But to your point, we certainly will continue that engagement with the public pertaining to that conversation specifically.
Madam President.
Commissioner Hanson.
Yeah, also follow up, you're going to get to these slides. Did you distinguish between respondents who live adjacent to the project versus those, just generally in Meridian?
Madam President, Commissioner Hanson, let me just quickly pull up. We did do some distinguished questions pertaining specifically to do you live adjacent or near. 218 respondents live adjacent to Linder Road, whereas 50 of the respondents own or manage a business or property along Linder Road. So we did ask that question. In addition, I'd like to say that through this conversations with the parcel owners, we'll be able to have a really good picture of what their preference is when we point blank ask them, which concept do you like? Would you like to stay or move? And thus that would tell us shared use road is necessary or the standard 5 lanes. So we will get more of that conversation as we finish out our public engagement this month.
Great, I think that'd be great. The other is, of course, the more informed someone is when they were asked for their preferences, the better the response. We had a presentation on green energy by Idaho Power over at our conference, and they took extensive polling and found, of course, 90% of the people supported enhancement in green energy, 89.8% or something. But then they asked if it would lead to just a 5% increase in your power rates. Do you still support it? And it dropped down to like 23%, 26%. So the reality of what it would cost. So it would be helpful to know, because the reality is, these are expensive projects, and that if one meant some of the other things you might want has to be delayed, we can't pay for those at the same time. That would be really valuable, because then they understand we're not paying for this. None of this comes out of the money they pay in taxes, or impact fees, or both. So I just want to we don't ask cost questions because you've already hinted at the cost of 2 and 3 are significantly more than 1. If they knew that, would that change their response?
Certainly, Madam President, Commissioner. When we do reflect on the cost slide here in a moment, I think a lot of that conversation will continue here in the coming months, especially when we get closer to the public hearing. Are we in a good place to move forward?
We are, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So as I highlighted earlier, this is the preferred option. You're going to see that the public generally want a 5-lane travel cross-section. And then moving along to the next question pertaining to costs. So you're going to see the breakdown of costs associated with each concept before you. Of course, the 3 lanes of the shared use road being 16.7 million, the standard 5-lane road being 31.3 million, and of course the 5 lanes of the shared use approximately 30.9 million. Each one of these costs is associated, and you're going to see some of the big significant changes, of course, in the construction and most notably the right-of-way impacts throughout the corridor. Are there any questions pertaining to the cost comparison?
Just one quick question, Brooke. So the timeline again is for you to come back this summer with an approved concept for us to approve a concept. What would be the year for construction for this?
Madam President and Commissioner, the date for construction hasn't been set yet. Certainly that is going to be contingent upon the commission approval of which option they want to move forward and any of the budget process and anticipated dollars available to put towards these projects. Certainly you can see the cost with this project dependent on which alternative is pretty significant.
And that's kind of the reason for my question is this going to be, there's a lot of expensive projects in the budget right now. And so is this something that realistically would be potentially funded in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, which of course is up to staff and the commission, but I'm just seeing the dollars just go up exponentially realistically, just not even the fact that it doesn't even have a construction year. So, but yes, thank you.
Certainly
any other
welcome.
questions? So keep going, Brooke. Thank you.
All right, and lastly, to talk about that path towards adoption, I already recapped where we were at. We do the commission update that we're having here this evening, and then, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to continue on that engagement with the public. May 6th, I'm meeting with the Meridian Transportation Committee. May 21st, the Meridian City Council presentation. As I highlighted, we started our property owner meetings last night. We will continue that through the rest of May. We have approximately 35 property owners to meet with, and those take place in the evening. And so we certainly have a lot of schedules to work around. I do want to say sincere thank you to our right-of-way team, who Renee has been a phenomenal staff member who has sat with me on all those virtual meetings of those property owners, providing and answering any questions that they may have. We anticipate coming before you here the summer of 2024. And just to recap what you can anticipate, in between May and summer 2024, staff is going to take all the feedback in which we receive. We will compile a final concept to bring forward to adoption. Our pre-adoption will be standard. We'll have the pre-adoption public hearing where we will introduce the recommended concept, both recommendations from the City of Meridian, the Meridian Transportation Committee, and certainly the staff recommendation. We'll have a 14-day public feedback period, and we'll present it before you at a public hearing, and you will make the decision which concept you'd like to see us move forward and adopt. That concludes my presentation. Thank you for your patience in enabling me to do this from home, and certainly to my teammate Pearson in the room, who is available to answer any additional technical questions should you have them. I'll stand for questions.
Thank you, Brooke. I think just a comment and consideration for not just you, Brooke, but for all of our leadership staff that are interacting and working with our friends at the City of Meridian. We had a really productive joint meeting several months ago, and they, shared their priority of us preserving right-of-way, for 5 lanes on every single arterial. They also talked about some other big priorities that they have, and I think, like, looking at the dollar amount of this, right? Like, we all have a finite amount of money to do the things that we all want to do. And I had talked about and mentioned that, yes, thank you for articulating this priority. However, if we were to pursue this, that means something else will have to come off that priority list or move down, right? And they appreciated that. And so I think knowledge is power, as Commissioner Hanson talked about, context as well, not just for the constituent, but also for our fellow decision makers. I think, Brooke, if I think speaking plainly about the costs of these projects, these 3 different concepts, as well as the cost of these other priorities that they've articulated to us, I think they need to see that, and they need to give us, and maybe as a follow-up joint meeting, direction on, generally speaking, this should be a higher priority over this, you know, type of thing. Because I think willfully just saying, because I agree with what Commissioner Goldthorpe had said, right? The plans are indicating that they really do want concepts 2 or 3, which, you know, is what it is. But the realistic factor of it is we will not have the money to do that without something else being deprioritized. So I think if we can give them the specifics, they will be able to articulate more honestly about where they want us to prioritize. So just food for thought, Brooke, as you continue to have those conversations, and I'm looking at our other staff and just make sure that that's part of future conversations. But Commissioner Goldthorpe.
You know, if I've learned one thing in the last 9 years, it's been that this day was going to come when we would not have sufficient revenues to do the number of projects and what we were doing 9 years ago, because our revenue couldn't possibly keep up with the inflation that we've experienced. Whether that's permanent or not is another question. But I can see the day coming very quickly that we are looking at maybe 2 or 3 major projects a year, maybe only 2, and a number of maintenance projects, the rapid response projects, the safe routes to school hopefully can continue. But the day of having enough money to do a lot of things is just about over. Thank you.
Any other questions from Commissioner Hanson?
Madam President, I would just add, Brooke, and as you go back and talk to the city of Meridian, to me, this is really entirely in their hands, because it's about what does this area look like as it changes. It's gonna change. It's gonna change significantly, so it will change. What do they want it to look like? And I hope that as part of that, they're in a position to say to the other property owners whose property won't be bought out, but whose value will be significantly different. Because once this changes, either under concept 2 or 3, it's not a feasible thing to be living on that road. And so those other properties who technically we don't have to buy out their house is really not a place they probably want to live, and they may want to be bought out, even though they don't have to be bought out. So the city needs to participate in that and say, okay, what's our vision for the land use changes that have to take place, and include it as the whole area and not just those pieces of property that have to be purchased. I think this is the first time in my memory that there's this many homes that would have to be purchased in a single project. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your work on this, Brooke, and we hope to see you back.
Certainly. Thank you, and have a good evening.
Okay. All right. Our second one is our legislative session wrap-up. Mr. Broxham, thank you for being here. We're not the Capitol building.
Thank you, Commission. Good to be with you this evening. For the record, my name is Ben Broxham with Ben Broxham & Associates. I serve as lobbyist and government affairs representative for the district. We did complete the legislative work for the year in their regular session. There's already rumors of an extraordinary session, but I'll get to that in a minute. I think a couple lessons and a quick overview from this year. First, we saw for the 3rd or 4th year in a row a record number of bills introduced. A lot of those were either cookie cutter bills from think tanks or out of state entities that are pushing ideas in multiple states at the same time. And then a lot of bills that had been previously tried or tried multiple times, which is also a departure from the traditions in the building of if a policy is discussed and doesn't move forward, it's typically done for the year. We saw a record number of reintroductions on the same concept or very similar language. Right up until the very end of session when we saw multiple iterations of the transportation budget, enhancement budget. So other major takeaways from this session that was just fascinating in kind of the think of it as a hockey game, right? Kind of 3 different periods. At the end of that first period, start of second period, there was a change in House leadership. That was a direct correlation to the budgeting process and the changes that they made this year. I think that's the first time in Idaho history that's happened during a legislative session. So certainly interesting and just a good physical or tangible example of the political strife that exists in the building and some of the fractures even within a state with a supermajority. Other things that were interesting, we expected them to wrap up their work based on legislative leadership meetings at the beginning of session. Around the end of March, there is a mandated 5-day waiting period from a Supreme Court decision. And so there's typically a recess and they come back and take up any last minute items. That got prolonged about 3.5 weeks. Part of that is the change to the budget process. Part of that is changes in leadership. And part of that is just the contentious nature of the legislature. All 105 legislators are up for re-election every 2 years. This is a primary election cycle. So those with opponents, which is the majority of them, are now out campaigning, knocking doors, and hosting fundraisers and town halls, et cetera. So 14 long weeks. A couple of good things that came out of this session. Some of the predatory legislation that we saw introduced did not move forward, and continuations of large-scale projects for infrastructure, and especially transportation, were fully funded this year. And so the reason that's important, one, is the money will flow and help communities and include the district. I think the other reason that's important is that now moves into what we are now calling the maintenance budget, which means it's not guaranteed, but more likely to continue, right? So anytime you start a new program, that funding is very heavily scrutinized and debated, as is the policy. Once the policy passes and there's kind of an obligation to fund it, there's a year where the funding flows and people decide if it works or not. So this year was a really strong commitment from the legislature to continue to fund not only infrastructure, but employees, maintenance, safety, and other things. So there are opportunities for the district to take advantage of those funds. Some of those will be directed straight to you, and some of them will have to be applied for. Happy to speak to those in a little bit more detail if necessary. And I think the big news of the day is legislation that was introduced to change the makeup structure, terms of office, and other things this session stayed. After moving quickly through the House, committee stayed on the amending order for, I believe, 9 weeks, and multiple iterations or attempts to try to fix or redo that were discussed, but ultimately not introduced. So I think part of that, again, is the change in leadership that happened. We had Chairman Monks became Majority Leader Monks, and so that created a different power dynamic between the chairman and leadership. And then I also think that created an opportunity for us to work with him to kind of slow down and let cooler heads prevail. So a little bit of gratitude for him and his work on that. I think the other key takeaway is that while the legislature grapples with issues and the growth of this state, and as you all decide, as you were just reviewing, which projects to prioritize and what to do, the state is changing, right? It's not just changing by political party, it's changing by size, it's changing by shape, and people move with their feet and their wallets, right? And so I think we're seeing that. The other thing is, with the growth that Idaho has experienced, the influence of, well, I'll just say the influence has changed both inside and out of the state, right? More think tanks, more money, more campaign donations are coming in massive amounts. And again, this year, a record number of people registered to work on bills as lobbyists. And so the secret is out. Idaho has been found and it is growing. So happy to dig in, answer any questions, speak to any specifics if needed.
Commissioner Goldthorpe.
If there's an extraordinary session, what do you think they're going to cover?
Yeah, great question. So at the end of the legislative session, a bill that had actually been introduced pretty early moved quickly through at the end. Was dealing with the legislature wanting to have permission for any waivers for Medicaid. So healthcare topic, and that was an effort to try to curb costs or grow programs. Depending on who you ask, the way the language could be read, it may or may not impact existing programs and existing funding. And so the governor signed the bill and then had a pretty aggressive letter saying, we expect you to come in and address this. He thought they would address it before they went home. Ultimately, because of other policy constraints and the time being into the 14th week, that did not happen. And so There's two ways that could happen. The governor could call them back and mandate them to address the issue. Legislators can also now call themselves back. That was put in the Constitution last election cycle, so they would need 60% of the House, 60% of the Senate, and they could come back and address what they want. Typically, those sessions last a day or two and are very specific to that issue. They don't bring up other bills. They don't typically work on other things. They're there for one reason and one reason only. Not to say other people wouldn't try, but that would be the core focus of them coming back. We initially thought that may happen fairly quickly, even within a week or so. But with the primary election being a month away, we think the likelihood of that happening, if it does, would probably be between following the election and before July 1st, when the state fiscal year starts over.
Another follow-up question has to do with us. Last year, in anticipation of some predatory activities towards ACHD, we discussed how to best address the lack of information that the rural legislators especially have with regards to a single county highway district as opposed to the rural highway districts. We didn't do any of that, really. What do you think would be the likely success or failure of us as commissioners, together with you possibly, visiting face-to-face throughout the state between now and the next session to make sure? I had a conversation with Britt Raybould after her plea for some help developing policy, and I discovered very quickly that she had no idea of what was causing our problems with the legislature, and really didn't know that there was a difference between the two types of highway districts and what our needs are. So that's why I'm asking this question.
Yeah, I think a couple things. One, we spend an enormous amount of time educating legislators from outside the Treasure Valley, right? The majority of legislators in Ada County specifically, as well as Canyon County and some of the other surrounding areas, have at least a base understanding of what the district is, right? It's a unique...
See, I don't know that anymore.
Yeah, it's a unique situation in government, right? So I think that's a little bit different, but...
when do you spend this time with the others? Because they're all gone. I mean, and how do you address it? I'm thinking the face-to-face, and you're obviously thinking some other way.
Sure. Madam President, Commissioner, I don't think I'm open to either idea. That's fine. I think time constraints and budget constraints would be the issue of us doing a statewide roadshow, right? But we spend a lot of time building relationships. That can be phone calls, that can be Zooms, that can be town halls. And I think there's a lot of good information on our website, right? The communications team for the district does a very good job of letting folks know who we are and what we're working on, whether it's snow removal, potholes, or major projects, right? And so I think the answer is, as commissioners, you are elected officials and should absolutely be reaching out to folks. I think we have a pretty strong list of champions, and you saw that come out as bills moved to the House floor. And as we worked with senators, and I think we also have a lot more work to do. I mean, to your point, there's 1,000 bills a year at this point going through, and it's really hard to get folks' attention, especially if they're really worried about something in Rigby, right?
Well, I think we were a potential of one guy away from a disaster in the House, and that one guy changed sides the last 3 weeks of the session, and that's not enough.
I agree.
I met with him face-to-face for 2 hours, and that's why I don't think it's enough.
Ben, do you mind sharing a little bit about the budget pieces? What was in the ITD budget? What money we can expect to come to the district to support some of our needs?
Sure. Thank you, Madam President. So passage, this is the third year of 3 years of what we would call one-time funding, 200, 200, 200, which was part of the governor's overhaul on transportation. That last $200 million will be available statewide. So those are open for application. You would have to go through and apply, justify the need. And then there's also the distribution formula from last year's bill that was fully funded. So you will get a pretty good chunk of change. I want to say around 18 million. Don't quote me on that, even though I'm on the record. I will look that up and get it for you, but it's in that neck of the woods. And again, specific to the strategic initiatives. So I will also say we have had interesting policy concepts plugged into budgets. So for the last few years, just because of the makeup of the district and it being a little bit different, there's been different priorities. Our roads and bridges are in much better condition than a lot of other parts in the state, right? And so with the money has come additional criteria, mandates, and policies. This year, there's a focus on the Ustick interchange. So part of that money will be set aside for that, approximately $7 million. But I think for the 200, there's other areas of the community to look at throughout the county and throughout the district, right? So confident that the team can put that together. We're happy to help try to point you in the right direction if needs be, and help you delineate where those funds can be used or how and when their applications are due, et cetera. So happy to help.
Thanks, Ben. And so for the 7 million that goes to the Ustick piece, which is for those members of the public that are like, wait, what? That's the project that Nampa was pursuing, and we share a segment of that road split right down the middle. And so I'm just curious, Ben, should we be do we have to do anything with ITD to like receive that 7 million? Like, do you know some of the logistics? When can we expect some clarity? Because I know Nampa is under a very tight deadline.
Yeah, thank you. So we have reached out to Nampa Mayor and Chief of Staff. We'll be following up with them in the next couple of weeks to kind of frame that out. And then we'll also be communicating with ITD, as I know staff will as well. So I will get a report back to you on that. I don't have a specific hard date of when, but typically we start to see the funding flow as early as a couple weeks after session and as late as the last day of the year for that type of funding. So, yep.
Okay, thanks, Ben. Commissioner McKinney.
Thank you, Madam President. Ben, just one quick question, a follow-up. One of the bills that we discussed in our recent Compass Board meeting was the Preservation of Agricultural Land bill. And it was pointed out there that that bill, under the process that it sets up, property can be placed in a preservation group, and there's no exception for roadway projects. And it's clear, of course, to me that the intent is to limit development, which doesn't necessarily go along with the roads necessarily, because development and roadway construction can be two different things. But I'm thinking that in terms of, it was brought up that, for example, if a piece of property along the right-of-way of the new Highway 16, if this had been in place and a property along that corridor had been in this, it would have prevented that whole project from going through, because it's going through mostly open agricultural land. We have, looking down the road, we have the Lake Hazel Road extension and so on, again, going through open land. And is there any discussion or thought among legislators to come back next year perhaps and maybe amend that a little bit to allow, construction of roads, even if there's property that's being maintained open otherwise, because it strikes me that's an oversight of the bill. Has anyone talked about that at all?
Madam President, Commissioner, I think that's a good question. I think legislators tend to vote on policies and have a little bit of horse blinders on when they do it, right? They're thinking one way, they're thinking about one issue or one topic or one spot in their area. It's hard to think statewide about all the possible scenarios that could happen. I think if we bump into a situation where we're confined by that, or we have other districts in the state that are confined by that, that's a very justifiable reason to go back and make a technical correction. We're only about 2 weeks out from the wrap-up of session, so I haven't heard a lot of chatter about next year yet, other than what's campaign fodder. But certainly something we can keep on our radar and work through the mechanics of if needed. Happy to do that.
Great, thank you.
Well, I don't see any other questions, so I just want to take a moment and thank you, Ben, for your incredible and hard work that you and your team did for us and the taxpayers of Ada County. You did an amazing job, so thank you.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
Okay. All right, commissioners, we just have one small executive session in the back. Do we need a 5-10 minute break, or do we want to power through?
Oh, that's what you always say.
Power through. All right, let's go in the back. It is, I promise.